please join me in welcoming, and we're going to start with our Executive Director of the Tayshoff Center for Inclusive Higher Education, Beth Myers.
Hello, everyone. I'm Beth Myers. I am the Executive Director of the Tayshoff Center for Inclusive Higher Education at Syracuse University. I also teach in the Teaching and Leadership Department there, teaching future educators about inclusion. I'd like to extend some thank yous first. Thank you to the Delancey Street Foundation. This space is beautiful. We love the work that you're doing. Thank you especially to SULA, including Joan Adler and her team who helped to make this happen. The Syracuse University School of Education and Dean Joanna Massangila. The Tayshoff Family Foundation for really supporting this work, but supporting all of the work that we do in inclusive higher ed. I'd like to extend a special thank you to our panelists. We have such a fantastic group tonight. I'd also like to thank the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, Cal State Sacramento, Cal Tash for their sponsorship, and all of our friends and partners in California, especially who helped spread the word about this event tonight. And I'd also like to thank Dan Habib, our filmmaker, who has allowed us to use his preview of his film to kick off this event tonight. So, our event is called Redefining Inclusion. We're going to start off with a preview of Dan Habib's new film, Intelligent Lives. Intelligent Lives focuses on three central themes: the history and legacy of intelligence testing, how narrow perspectives of intelligence continue to disproportionately limit people with disabilities, and a new emerging paradigm of inclusion. Dan has generously allowed us to watch a preview of his film tonight. This is a 14-minute preview of a full-length feature documentary that will be out next year. And we have with us also Micah Fialka-Feldman, who is featured in the film and has done extensive work at Syracuse University. After the film, then I'll introduce the panelists. But without further ado, Intelligent Lives.
Our son Jesse had cerebral palsy and could not speak. And they told us he would never be able to learn to read or write. And it was suggested to us that he be placed in a separate classroom or a different school. My wife, Marianne, and I fought to have Jesse included in general education. He used a computer to communicate, became a straight-A student, wrote poetry, and aced every one of his Latin tests. Then one year, the school insisted that Jesse take the Stanford-Binet IQ test. Now, this test contains just absurd, antiquated questions like, Jesse, do you dust a dresser? And Marianne and I are thinking, dust? My wife and I don't dust. We call dressers bureaus. And anyway, dusting wasn't a chore I had thought to assign to my child with quadriplegia. The IQ test told us nothing about Jesse's potential, about who he was as a person. Can any attempt to measure intelligence predict a person's value or potential to contribute meaningfully to the world?
I'm not sure if I will do a meditation tonight because I'm kind of tired, but...
All right, I'll see you in the morning.
Okay, you too. Bye.
All right, bye.
I had a good night of teaching my class tonight at Syracuse University.
I had a good night teaching my class tonight at Syracuse University.
I'm looking forward to having a good day tomorrow. Hope everyone had a good Monday and a good start to their week.
The world is moving to the song I hear. Who's that singing when there's passion in my ear? Man, gushing memories, almost lost everything. Fella need them fellas running in the dream. We were in a van where the kids were driving. Saw myself in the highlands at age 13. And I'm asking questions to the present day me. Moving backwards down.
Lots of people in society probably still think that people with disabilities are not included in their town or in their family, and some people still have the mindset of sending them away. And I saw a sheet of paper in the mail that said I had a 40 IQ still, and when I Googled it, it was somebody that can't do tons of things, probably can't teach at a university. Here's my mom, my dad, and my youngest son. Throughout first grade through fifth grade, I watched them trying to help me get in regular school, and then it's hard to advocate because it took a long time. But I just know that I learned a lot from my mom and dad.
The first label plastered on my son's tiny forehead was jaundiced. That was soon followed by neurologically impaired, developmentally delayed, learning disabled, low functioning, educable, mentally impaired with learning disabilities. What we want to focus on is not a label, but on what are the supports that a child or a person needs in order to participate in a meaningful way. This whole idea of segregating kids doesn't fit.
All right, put your hands down.
Now, Mike and I live closer to each other than we do to our parents.
Oh, a chair?
And I don't know if anyone knew that that was going to be possible in his life. And it's something that makes me emotional because you just it's just these constant reminders that you don't know what people are going to do.
Lemonade. Food or not food?
No.
Why not?
It's a drink.
It's a drink. He was very engaged. Anytime I looked in his direction, he had a look on his face that said, come on, keep going. I'm right with you, and I want to learn this stuff. The IQ test measures a very limited potential of our brain to learn and misses all the other stuff, a person's ability to take context clues from their environment, from other people. It misses entirely a person's desire to engage with other people and their openness to relationships. Micah's got a ton of that.
He's taking really high-level classes at one of the best universities for disability studies. He's working here. And why do you think it is that we don't have more people like Micah at college?
Alfred Binet, the French psychologist, published the first intelligence test in 1905 to identify children that needed educational assistance. Binet stressed that intelligence was a fluid quality, shaped by one's environment and culture, and subject to change over time. The American psychologist Henry Goddard radically altered how the Binet-Simon test was used. In 1908, Goddard insisted that the test was a scientific tool to identify the feeble-minded in our midst. In 1913, the United States government funded Goddard's research to test 29,000 immigrants a week at Ellis Island. Goddard said his results showed that 79% of Italians, 83% of Jews, and 87% of Russians were feeble-minded. Goddard's work fueled a widespread movement called eugenics, which called for eliminating the menace of the feeble-minded through forced sterilization and institutionalization. Eugenics had the support of prominent physicians, professors, governors, presidents, and even the United States Supreme Court. From the 1910s through the 1970s, hundreds of thousands of people were institutionalized, and more than 60,000 people were forcibly sterilized. At the beginning of World War I, the U.S. Army administered IQ tests to nearly 2 million soldiers. Men who scored lower were fit to be privates, but not officers. Privates were the most likely to end up on the front lines of battle. During World War II, Hitler cited the U.S. eugenics research as justification for sterilizing and murdering hundreds of thousands of Germans with disabilities. Recent studies have shown IQ test results are biased by factors such as socioeconomic status and cultural background. For example, African American students are almost twice as likely as white students to be classified with intellectual disability. Despite its destructive roots and flaws, IQ testing is alive and well. 49 of 50 states still use IQ testing as an assessment tool to determine whether a student is labeled as intellectually disabled. Once a student is labeled, they are often segregated in separate classrooms from typically developing children. In the United States, only 17% of students with intellectual disability are fully included in general education classrooms. One high school in Boston is showing that all students, including those with significant disability, can succeed in general education.
How many P's are there?
Like 2.
2, so 9P what?
Square.
Good. Write that in that first box.
I don't know what Nair's IQ is. What I do know is that Nair is a committed, hardworking student who has some challenges.
I'm gonna need you on your paper.
And Nair, after you paint, you're gonna do 1, 2, 3, right? Cover something up, and then what are you gonna do? You're gonna step back behind this line here, right? He's gonna take the picture. What are you gonna paint that makes you happy? What are you gonna tell me? Show me. Nair has a style of his own, and he's not afraid to go in there and freely draw and express himself and capture line and color and movement. And I don't think he really knows how talented he really is. If I got half of that from some of my other students, I'd be happy, because that determination he has is something that is just in him. He cannot give that up. He has to do it.
She's white.
She's white?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is she a human or a mermaid or what? A mermaid? You don't know?
No.
Okay, so what else do you have to do?
He gets frustrated a lot because what he has in his head is hard for it to come out of his mouth.
How many men were killed at Gettysburg? So we're looking for a what? Looking for...
It's not like the movies, where you get this teacher that comes in, she saves the day, and everything's great.
You guys come to the circle.
It's one day at a time.
You guys can use your study guides. I wouldn't even use the notebook. I would literally just use the study guide while we play Jeopardy. Yeah, guys.
I think that intelligence looks different for everybody. It's clear that he has an intellectual impairment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he can't be intelligent.
Please describe why our unit on government is the most important thing you will learn in all of high school and possibly your life. Nair.
You have learned about the government because you will use this information for when you vote.
That is very true. You will use this information when you vote. I will add that. 3 branches of government.
The fact that he is a black man and he is tall. Sometimes it is troubling to wonder what might the outside world perceive him as. If he's being loud or jumpy or enthusiastic, somebody might perceive that as being threatening. It's one thing when they're young and they're cute, but eventually they're going to get older, they're going to go through puberty, and the outside world is going to see them very differently.
I remember them saying something about his IQ level, and I think it was like 80 or 90. How? Who developed that IQ? So we're using a testing rubric based on the 19th century or the early 20th century, and we're using it in 2015, 2020 to define our children's mental capacity? Nah, I can't buy that.
As a mother, I'm not going to try to fix him or change him. I accept him for who he is. You look and see what they're good at, and you nurture that. That's just being a parent. He is going to college. It's not a hope. He is going.
It's a game.
Walked in, 30,000 in my pocket, had him getting like, ooh. $50,000 on you want me, got her screaming like, ooh. Cause I got a check, nigga on the flip, I ain't got a flip, but I got it, ooh. Get out some mix, she gon' wanna sit, every nigga in the set, and now she screaming like, ooh. How much you made? Made $2 million off of me, tell you, and I'm like, ooh. Walked in, 30,000 in my pocket, had him getting like, ooh. $50,000 on you want me, gotta scream like, ooh. How much you made? Made $2 million off of me, tell you, and I'm like, ooh. They tried to draw me with a case, but you know I hadn't skated. I was singing like, ooh. I swear, boy, I know my role and I play. If you heard that I'm talking, then I said it. Coin, where you at? At the top of the log, and I stay. I'm a bad boy, but I don't wear big clothes like me. In the club, and a nigga in the bitty poppin'. In there, when she want a free drink, tell the bitch to get up off it. Hey, I'm the nigga in the get it poppin'. Her hair short like Denny Rock. At the clip point, we flying. When I landed, boy, I walked in, 30,000 in my pocket, had him getting good just like, ooh.
Dan, I think I speak for all of us when I say we are so excited and cannot wait for this film to come out. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Dr. Brent Elder. Brent is a first-year assistant professor at Rowan University and a graduate of Syracuse University, where he was invited by Micah to be on his circle of support. Dr. Elder's research focuses on the development of sustainable, inclusive education practices in under-resourced schools. He conducted his doctoral research in Kenya as a Fulbright scholar. Welcome, Brent. Next, we have Micah Fialka-Feldman. Micah is a self-advocate and teaching assistant at Syracuse University and was featured in Intelligent Lives. Micah is a national speaker, a self-advocate, and a pioneer who fights for disability justice and inclusion. Micah earned a certificate in disability studies at Syracuse University in 2015 through Inclusive U. He is a teaching assistant, my teaching assistant, and the teaching assistant of several other professors in SU's School of Education, and works at the Tayshoff Center as an outreach coordinator. In May of 2014, Micah was appointed by President Obama to the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities. Thank you, Micah. Next, we have Dr. Kathleen G. Kathy is a professor of special education at California State University, Sacramento. Kathy has been working in the field of special education since 1978. She served as president of TASH from 2003 to 2006 and has been a tireless teacher and self-advocate. Thank you for joining us, Kathy. We also have Dan Habib, the filmmaker of Intelligent Lives. Dan is the creator of the award-winning documentaries, including Samuel and Who Cares About Kelsey? Dan is the filmmaker at the University of New Hampshire's Institute on Disability. In 2014, Habib was appointed by President Obama to the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities. He's also been nominated for and received numerous awards for his work in disability media. Thank you for joining us, Dan. And we also have Cheryl Thies. Cheryl is an education advocate in the Parent Training and Information Center at the Disability Rights, Education, and Defense Fund. She works to address disparities for youth with disabilities and to increase meaningful inclusion across all settings, including child welfare and juvenile justice. In addition to her professional experience, Cheryl is the mother of 5 children, 2 with disabilities, and a foster and adoptive parent. Thank you for joining us, Cheryl. Okay, instead of standing behind this podium for questions, I am going to sit and sort of turn my chair so it doesn't look too awkward when I'm asking questions of the panel. And I think we have some mics down there. Are there mics? Okay, here they come. Okay, so I'm going to start out and just ask you a few questions, get some conversation going, and then we'll put some questions out to the audience. I'm going to start with Micah, of course. Micah, it is a really big deal to agree to have a camera crew follow you around and see sort of lots of really personal aspects of your life. Why did you agree to do this project?
I agreed to be in the movie because I think the film shows how the testing of the IQ is just a number, and it doesn't show anything, but to show that somebody can teach at Syracuse University with a 40 IQ.
Micah, do you think people are surprised at what you're doing now?
No.
I'm never surprised by you, Micah. Micah, tell us a little bit about why you decided to go to Syracuse.
I spoke at two big conferences through the school of ed in 2011, and then and I have lived in Michigan my whole life, but there was a point that it was time to leave my mom and dad I called my mom one time when I was there and said, I want to move there, and she said, okay. And I came home and I said, I have to set up a circle of friends, and I have a great circle and a cool team in Syracuse.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you for agreeing to be in this film, because the rest of us think it's really important too. Dan, as the filmmaker, following your other films of including Samuel, which I love, by the way, I think my students were watching it, Micah, our students were watching it yesterday while we were on a plane coming here because we weren't there to teach it. So they're watching including Samuel in class. And Who Cares About Kelsey? is another fantastic film that focuses on disability. Why Intelligent Lives? Why did you decide to go with this theme next?
Whoa, that's loud. So first of all, thank you, Beth, and thanks to everyone who organized and put on this event, first of all, and for all of you for coming out on a busy night. I appreciate your time, and I have to give a special shout out. I always look out for the people that are behind the scenes doing these things that don't get the recognition. Carly Grafazzi, who's here, put a lot of work into this, so go Carly. Anyway, just had to acknowledge Carly for all the work she put in. So, thank you, Micah, for agreeing to be in this movie. It is a lot to put yourself out there this way, and I spent a lot of time researching before I found one of the perfect people for this film. So many of you know that my son Samuel also has a disability, and who's 17 now, by the way. So if you have him frozen in time as this little kid from Including Samuel, nope, he's shaving, he's got crushes on girls, he's got the whole thing going on. But really, Including Samuel was, for me, a hearts and minds film about high expectations and understanding that including people with disabilities in all aspects of society is the only way we're going to get to a point where we have high expectations for every single individual. And and so one thing that's painful but true is that the stigma around disability is still extremely strong. And so, I made it to be a catalyst for change around inclusive ed. I did Who Cares About Kelsey to make sure that students with more hidden disabilities weren't forgotten. And Kelsey was a young woman with ADHD and a lot of behavioral issues, and those students are sometimes the ones that are blamed for their disability. So that's also something I feel really strongly about. But actually there's a strong Syracuse connection that most of you probably don't know for why this film happened. And that is about 5 years ago, I was talking with Doug Bicklin, who is the former dean of the School of Education at Syracuse, and who's been an advisor on all my films. And I said to Doug, what's like the next frontier? What's the next level? And he said, until we can examine the way we perceive intelligence as a society and broaden what it means to be intelligent in society and really chip away at these very narrow definitions of intelligence, like the IQ test, we're not going to get there as a society. So that was really a seed that Doug planted to do this. And then I started thinking and doing research and found that students with intellectual disabilities are the most segregated group. Only 17%, as you saw in the film, of students with intellectual disabilities are fully included in school, or meaningfully included, which means they spend at least 80% of their day in general education. Only about 40 to 50% nationally will graduate with a regular high school diploma. Not surprisingly, the attendance rate for college and the employment rates are pitifully low, although there's a lot of great work that the Tayshoff Center is doing and others to create opportunities for college. So I started thinking, well, how can I do a film that hopefully will be the same kind of catalyst for students with intellectual disabilities as I've tried to do, for Including Samuel and other films with students with other disabilities. So really what I thought about was a paradigm shifter like Micah and Nair, who shows that there's no way you can measure human capacity and human potential. There's no numeric quantifiable way to measure that. And Micah is such a wonderful paradigm shifter, as is Nair. But I also wanted to look back a little bit at history, because it's kind of like the Black Lives Matter movement that we have today. If you don't understand that we are a country that comes from a history of racism and slavery and segregation, you don't understand why the Black Lives Matter movement has such resonance today. And so if you don't understand that we're a country that has used IQ testing and other supposed measures of intelligence to segregate and sterilize and marginalize and stigmatize millions of people, then you don't understand the incredible battle we're facing now for inclusion for those same individuals in our current day. So, I think finally I would say that what I hope this film does is help people understand that disability is really a gap between a person's abilities or challenges and the environment in which they're expected to function. Syracuse and the Tayshoff Center have created a culture at Syracuse where a student like Micah can thrive. If Micah was in a different place and a different time, you wouldn't have the same opportunities. If Samuel is in an inaccessible downtown where you've got curbs in front of every store, he's not going to thrive. So it's all about changing that environment. I think I'm so honored to be with this panel because everyone on this panel is really about changing the environment in which we live, not changing the individuals or fixing the individuals with disability. So, thank you.
Cheryl, I'm going to go to you next. How do you see these issues playing out in real life with advocacy and educational rights?
Well, I think there's a certain amount of both implicit bias and explicit bias when it comes to intelligence and intelligence testing. And you see that fairly early on. Many public schools will do okay integrating students, keeping them in the classroom in elementary school. And as students get older, there starts to be more and more of a push, in my experience, to segregate those students. So there's some paternalism there of, we don't want to put them under too much stress, it'll just be too hard. But there's also some really important points along the road, the educational trajectory, around things like, are you going to be on diploma track or not? Are you going to be in a functional life skills program, which for many students with more significant disabilities literally means, learning how to go to the grocery store and sort of those skills that I actually think many high school students with and without disabilities could use, to the exclusion of other kinds of learning opportunities. And so things like integrated art and music, which weren't so hard to do in elementary school, you see students be more and more left out of those kinds of programs. You also see things, I was thinking about this on the way over, just because the politics of our country are on my mind, around things like civics. Many high school programs have a civics program, it's expected, but students who are in segregated settings often don't get to learn about voting rights and how you participate. And so for parents, what happens is that as their students struggle to fit in because educators don't necessarily always know how to successfully include students, and although there are some really wonderful co-teaching models that are being experimented with, we're really early in the learning curve with all of that. And so students can be bullied and they can be, anxious, and the large classroom may be too much. And so there's this kind of push of, wouldn't it be better if he had a small classroom? Wouldn't she do better with more students, without this pressure? And then all students lose, because I often tell families when I'm working with them and training them, there are no special day classes in the real world. We need to start teaching people how to work together, and it's not just about students with disabilities, it's about everyone. So the other thing I just want to say is, you start to see that there's very little effort, and I want to put a shout out actually to the Yo Disabled and Proud and the youth leadership folks in California around this, to teach students self-advocacy and disability awareness. We have students graduating high school who can't tell you what their disability is, can't tell you what medication they may or may not take, can't tell you what accommodations they need, or don't know how to ask someone for what they need. And all of those kinds of really practical skills that make you meaningfully included are just left completely out of the education while we're working on, can she sort colors? We see IEP goals repeated year after year after year that are virtually meaningless in the context of a student. I also think we have to be willing to interrogate ourselves. I think one of the things I loved about the preview of the film is that we are all a product of this IQ era. I know I grew up in a big family and I got to be the smart kid. I was given opportunities because I had that label based on IQ tests. Gifted programs were based on IQ tests. And there were people in my family who were absolutely left out of educational opportunity because someone decided at some point really early on that they weren't intelligent. So we have to be honest about how it plays out in our personal lives, how it plays out politically, how it plays out in who gets money for what and what programs. And I think it's actually a very subversive dynamic that this film brings up. How do we challenge and really change the paradigm?
Thanks, Cheryl. One of the things that really struck me about what you said is this tracking that happens between elementary school and high school, I think, really. This idea that we have to stick students in either an academic track or a life skills track. And why can't all of our students have both of those, right? I think every student needs some instruction in academics and every student needs some instruction in the skills of life. Micah, I know that Micah was at another university before Syracuse and had a fight with them about whether or not he could live in the dorms. And this is sort of where Micah is one of the pioneers in disability advocacy in higher education. And Micah, this talk about sort of life skills reminds me of something you've told me before about the questions that they asked you when they said that you couldn't live in the dorms. What kinds of questions did they ask you?
They asked me, how do I leave during a fire drill? And then they asked, how would you wake up? I said I would set my alarm. Then they asked, how would I make friends? I probably made more friends than they had.
So I think they had these expectations of you, right, Micah? This idea that there were things that you could and couldn't do. And I think you've done a really remarkable job of showing them, but showing all of us what how our expectations limit people. Kathy, you're charged with training future educators. How did these issues come into play when you're teaching at a university?
So, as many other people in this room, I prepare teachers in special education, but also general education. And really, both when I was a teacher and working with families and children and teaching my own students, I've never found IQ scores to be helpful in any way. The focus that we have, which is good practice, is person-centered planning, person-centered approach to looking at each child and what their potential is, and working with their family and looking at what their skills are, and just helping them grow as much as possible. So just challenging every student to the best of their ability to meet their potential. And you find that all families and all students have dreams and what they want to do. So I think the biggest challenge our educators have is that they go out and work in systems that use these labels. And we have the IDEA law that came into practice in 1976. And when you think about that, it's only been 41 years since all children had the right to be educated at all. Before then, many children were educated in church basements or just put in institutions. So 41 years seems like a long time, and we've come a long ways, but we have a long ways to go, because currently in that law, in order to get services, kids have to have labels. And that's the biggest challenge for educators as they come out. And while we push hard to create that philosophy, the biggest challenge is the systems within which they end up working. And so that's in the next, it'll be interesting the next 4 years. But right now, many of us are in a movement to try to reissue that law, the IDEA, with changes in it that will make it easier for inclusive education to exist for all children. Because currently, for example, in California, it depends on what school district you're in. In some school districts, your child might be included adequately and wonderfully, but in another school district, the administrator might say your child has to go to a segregated class or a segregated school. So we have a long ways to go. We've made progress, but we still have a long ways to go in terms of systems change. And it's going to be very important to be vigilant in the next 4 years.
Thank you. Brent, the next question is going to you. You're in a unique position as a new professor at Rowan, but also as a graduate student at Syracuse University. You became friends with Micah. When I first met Micah, I thought I knew what circle of supports were like, or what they were. I had never seen a circle of support like Micah has. Micah has built for himself this group of people, friends who surround him and support each other in ways that I didn't think would ever be possible. Brent surprised me. He was one of the people on Micah's circle who was sort of the advisor of all things taboo. And I always thought that it was just so interesting how Micah had built up these supports for himself, that Micah is an incredible advocate for himself, and he's really good about asking for help when he needs it, but also for helping other people. So Brent, my question goes to you. As one of Micah's friends, but as a teacher-educator, how did your experience at Syracuse and with Micah influence your work in schools and vice versa?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you all for coming, by the way. Nice to see so many familiar faces. First and foremost, Micah and I are friends, and we met probably at the trivia night with beers and pictures, just like you do when you're in a grad program or in university. And we'd joke around. I give him I give him a hard time all the time, just like I would give anybody else. And he said, "Oh, come to my circle meeting." And I said, "Only if there's pizza, man. I'm not going to come otherwise." It was really important to talk about things that were, dating and drinking and finding a girlfriend and all those different things that were important. So we had some good laughs at the circle meeting, but everyone wanted to be there because it was important not to say, should we or can we include Micah, or at Syracuse University, we were in the same disability studies program. And you guys co-taught the same class after you and I co-taught the same class. I mean, we had very similar academic experiences because people weren't asking, can Micah participate? It's how can we, the onus is on us, right? How can we as educators support this? Because Micah, you bring so much to the table because you have so many talents and tons of friends that you bring everyone together to move it forward. And it's not, we're not worried about labels. And Syracuse was a place where you don't have to start the conversation at the beginning, and you can focus your energies on moving things forward and being more progressive. And that led to, I've seen you thrive at Syracuse, and now you're teaching there, full time, and it's wonderful to see because you're in a place where we're moving beyond this label of intelligence, this notion of IQ tests, and really just focusing on what do you need as friends. We all need different supports. You've supported me tons of times that, we just don't label it that way. So I'm just impressed with the things that you've accomplished at Syracuse, and it's just about infusing that in our day-to-day conversations. And I try to use that now as a new professor when I have undergrads or graduate students really saying, it's like, move beyond those labels, throw them away. I know, Kathy, you do the same thing with your students where you get this file this thick of intelligence testing and you say, just throw it away and move forward and do person-centered planning and look at who the person is, and then break out of those kinds of stereotypes of what you can and can't do. So, yeah, that's my experience with Micah.
Micah, what are you doing now?
I teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I am a teaching assistant that I help train teachers that are going to become teachers, and then I do and then I do outreach for the Shaw Center of helping people learn about what we do at Syracuse.
This is a question probably for the whole panel, but really thinking about what our charge is. Kathy really talked about over the next 4 years, but what's the future here? What do we really need to be thinking about? What do we need to be focusing on? Where do we hope this will go next? Dan, do you want to start? Maybe as...
Sure. So I think that Kathy alluded to this earlier, that I think unfortunately in so many schools and in so many families, it's kind of a case-by-case decision. Can this child be included? Can this child be included? Can this teacher handle inclusion? Can this school handle inclusion? And not how do we create schools from the beginning that are designed for all kids, about true systems change. And there are some really great models right now that some of you may or may not be aware of that are trying to do that. And there's something that a couple of us here are involved in, some people in the audience are involved in, a project called SWIFT, School-Wide Integrated Framework for Transformation. If you go to swiftschools.org, you'll learn all about it. But what's really amazing about SWIFT, which is it was a $25 million federal grant that went to the University of Kansas. And I became the filmmaker for the project. There's great people working on it. And what it basically says is we can design schools that are great for all kids and have built-in capacity from the beginning to support kids with even the most significant disabilities. And one of the slogans of SWIFT is all means all. It means every single kid has the capacity to be included. And this is so important in the context of this college discussion because you don't get to a point, I don't think, like Micah. It's very difficult to reach a point like Micah or like Veronica, my friend in the audience, or other people who have disabilities unless you've had the opportunity to have a general education experience throughout school and get and be on a diploma track. So SWIFT does things like it looks at a school and says every single kid needs some degree of support. How do we create tiers of support at every level, this multi-tiered system of support that creates support for whatever your needs are, whether or not you have a label? How do we universally design our instruction from the beginning? And Samuel has an English teacher who, it's amazing, because every time she assigns something, there is a choice to watch a video, to read something, to listen to a story, to work with a peer. Everything is universally designed. And I've had so many experiences with Samuel over the years where we feel like at home, we're having to retrofit his homework to accommodate it, to modify it, and to not have that burden is incredible, to have it coming from the source. How do we teach teachers from the beginning to differentiate their instruction? How do we help them understand that that is the expectation for education in this day and age when you've got kids with disabilities and English language learners alongside each other in the classroom? How do we facilitate peers working together? So, it goes on and on and on. But SWIFT is really, I'm not trying to just overly promote SWIFT, but it really is kind of our best hope right now to scale up inclusive education nationally. So I really encourage you to take a look at the site, and that is what I see as the future of education if we can pull it off.
And I wanted to piggyback on that, Dan. One thing I'm always really focused on, what can we actually do right now? What can we do immediately in schools? So the work that I'm doing in southern New Jersey currently is we established inclusion committees where we have kind of iterative action plan goals where we say, okay, this month, what are we working on? We're going to do co-teaching. We're having sustained discussions because if we don't, the nature of schools is that things change so quickly and we have to evolve we have to have our discussions keep up with those changes as the kids changes, we have to form supports that support all students in classrooms so that you show that inclusive supports benefit everyone, even students without disabilities. So we found that having these iterative discussions on let's set goals, let's implement them, and let's see how we're doing and be honest about our successes and failures, and then moving forward from there and checking in again and saying, this is working, this is not working, and then it's tailored to each school. It's like a school-wide IEP, so to speak, but that's a really tangible, actionable item where you bring people that have dissenting views on inclusion, sitting down regularly, discussing it, and then practicing it.
And I just wanted to highlight something that Dan said about universal design for learning. This is something that we're working really hard to train our multiple and single subject teachers on so that their classrooms are created universally so that more students are accommodated from the get-go rather than the retrofitting kind of approach and making some students feel like they're not welcome, but you had to make this adaptation for me. Kind of this idea that we're teaching to some average which really doesn't exist. And so if we train our general education teachers in the first place to create really wonderful learning communities, it's so much easier for inclusive practices to exist. And that's something we're really involved in on my campus, is trying to change that paradigm shift from the very get-go in terms of the general education teachers.
And a lot of that comes from our own example. In our classes, I know that Micah and I work really hard to make our college class universally designed so that our students are both learning about universal design but also experiencing universal design in the classroom. So every semester have students that come to us with a piece of paper from the Office of Disability Services that says, here's the accommodations that I'm entitled to. And Micah and I always say, that's great, we're happy to make those accommodations, but then we say to the whole class, you don't need a label to get accommodations in this class. And if you have accommodations from the Office of Disability Services, you probably don't need them because everything that we do in this class is designed universally. So we try very hard to make it so that the things that students need are already built in the way that we teach the class. So students come very often saying, well, I get time and a half on tests. Well, I don't have a time limit on tests. Micah and I don't have a time limit on our tests. Everybody can have as much time as they need to take our tests. And sometimes, I end up Micah or I end up sitting in a conference room with a student who takes 3 hours to take a test that everybody else took for 45 minutes, and that's fine. But it's not about sort of how fast you can give us the information. Sometimes students come in and say, I need a note taker. A note taker is part of my accommodations. Well, the Disability Services Office, it costs them a lot of money to hire note takers for all of the classes. And we don't actually need that for our class because we assign that to students. It's part of the points that they get for a class. So we have 3 to 5 note takers for every class. They post it online, and so that all of our students can access the notes, because everybody has an off day where they didn't take great notes, or everybody misses a class sometimes where they need to access that. So we try to make things available for all students. And it's a really nice way to teach college students who are going to be future educators how to implement things that are good for all students. Cheryl.
So I just wanted to say that one of the biggest barriers, I think, to our students in public school right now is that they don't have these kinds of environments. So the level of anxiety and the level of stress of constantly trying to fit yourself into the system of being told, well, just ask for what you need when everybody else doesn't have to ask for what they need. And it also, we really want to look at a whole child and who they are. And children bring their race, they bring their gender, they bring their family's income level, their homelessness, their neighborhoods into the classroom. And so when you reduce the anxiety in the classroom and you aren't constantly triggering students, I often feel like students end up with PTSD just trying to survive the classroom environment. And instead you say, what do you need in that generic sense? Then you don't have to decide, are we going to focus on this student's intellectual disability, but this student's mental health? Pick a label, which label are you going to be? And instead we can just think about what do we need to remove in terms of barriers for all of our learners so they can be successful.
I just had one piece. I think I've been around the country to a lot of schools, and I've heard schools say, well, we don't have the money to do inclusion. We can't afford it. Well, I was filming for Swift in Mississippi a few months ago in a small town, Sunflower, Mississippi. This was in the Mississippi Delta. It was the poorest community I've ever been in. It was a $19,000 a year median family income. It was 100% free and reduced lunch. And they were doing inclusion beautifully in this school. The teachers were differentiating their instruction. It was UDL from the beginning. They were bringing in family volunteers into every classroom. There were foster grandparents in every classroom, parents. So anybody who says we don't have the money to do this, I just talk about Sunflower, Mississippi, and that usually quiets them pretty quickly because there's nobody that's doing it as well with less money than that. But I think that what I've learned from filming in a lot of schools is so much of it is about leadership. Leadership to me is the number one factor. If you have a principal or a superintendent that believes in this, that believes this is a human right and a civil right to have all kids together in a school, to have kids with disabilities learning alongside their non-disabled peers, they find a way to make it happen. And then they build an attitude and a culture within a school where that becomes the norm, and teachers need to get on board. And Patricia Lamprin, who you saw briefly in that film in Boston, she's basically like, if you're not with us, you're out of here, which is tough in this time of teachers' unions and everything, but she makes it really clear this is the vision for the future. So I think that for the families in the room who might be saying, well, that's great, but we have a crappy principal or whatever it might be that's not doing this, so much of this starts through relationship building, and so much of this starts through getting to the leaders in your school in hopefully collaborative ways. Not necessarily, you don't want to start from a confrontational, litigious kind of, I'm going to sue you, although sometimes it gets to that point. It's much better if it happens in a collaborative way and if you can win the hearts and minds of those principals over and those superintendents. So I honestly think that's where a lot of the work has to happen is shifting the approach of the leadership within a school district through a lot of squeaky wheel and advocacy, strong advocacy.
And I just want to add on that. I think my experience with school change has been filming. Yeah, very well said. Is if you're in a confrontational setting in a school. I had teachers that weren't willing to work with me with inclusive ed stuff, so we went to the playground where the teachers weren't out there and filming positive peer interactions and then showing that at faculty meetings and saying, look, it's working, and then it carries over into the class, and then you just be honest about those types of things that you can do, and it works. It takes time. School change is really slow, but I find documenting it in any way that you can, you get people on board and you show them consistent positive experiences with it and share their struggles, and you make change.
And I know there's some principals here, so thank you for coming, and administrators, thank you for being here tonight.
Okay, I think we'll take some questions from the audience now. Carly is back here.
Testing.
Yes, Carly has a microphone, so she's going to head over to take a question.
Hi, I'm Marlene Mayerson. I'm the directing attorney at Disability Rights Education Defense Fund.
Thank you for coming.
Hi. I just came back from DC. A couple different things made me realize so much how we live in this big bubble, and all the people in this room, just by being here, are in that bubble, and I love all of you for being in the bubble. I think it's a wonderful place to live. But, you know, I started out with a Supreme Court argument in saying the basic law, the IDEA, what level of benefit does a disabled student have to get from their education? So it guarantees a free, appropriate public education, and the big question was, well, do they have to get more than something trivial? And it's like, we're all sitting here, we've been doing this work, I've been doing it for about 40 years as an advocate and a lawyer. All of you have, you know, been doing various things, and we're sitting there, I'm sitting there, you know, in this altered reality where the question is it enough to get something more than trivial? That's what they're talking about, and for disabled kids. Whereas it's very obvious if you substituted any other demographic, it would be, are you kidding me? The highest court in the land, and we're debating whether it's okay. You get a guarantee of an education. What does that mean? Anything more than trivial? I mean, and this is where, you know, the reason it was in the Supreme Court is because most of the circuit courts of appeal had already decided that that was sufficient. And then we have a secretary nomination, DeVos, and I just feel like her saying that IDEA doesn't have to be enforced should have gotten out. I mean, I wish we just had the groundswell of like hundreds of thousands of parents and advocates and teachers. And I feel like, you know, yeah, people are writing letters, but it's not the same as having like 10,000 people at the hearing with their kids and teachers and people who, so I just want to say that I think I'm all for forward. I don't want to be a big bummer. Anything about what's happening politically is a big bummer. But and I'm so glad there's still, you know, all these people doing things for the future, what for the future. But we're about to be, I mean, we could be sent back really, 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 really far back into the past. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important for all the people that are in the various stakeholding positions in this room to just start activating like a lot. Because, you know, we're talking to each other, basically. And, I mean, I could go on and on. I probably should stop. But you get the idea. I mean, I don't think that there's the groundswell. You wouldn't know. These rights are so precious, and they're, at this point, even though it's 40 years, they're taken for granted in a certain way that can't be taken for granted anymore.
Thank you. Would anybody like to respond to that? It wasn't a question, which we were
I'll
with.
say one thing. I think it can be so overwhelming to see what's happening, just talked about, that what I would just say to everyone in this room is think about your own sphere of influence. Think about what you can affect, whether it's your family, your neighborhood, your school, your community, your school board, and work at that level. Some people want to work at the national level, and I support that. Some people want to do the kind of advocacy that needs to happen that you're talking about. But don't be so daunted by this that you do nothing. You know, affect what you feel you can affect and what you're prepared to affect. And just working in your own school and your own school board and on your own administrators is a huge deal right now. It's really important to keep the strong grassroots activism going.
Show more of Dan's films to everyone you know.
Hi.
All right, next. Yes, thank you.
I'm Sandy Baker, and warmth of my heart. I'm a graduate of the University of Rochester, taught school back there about 300 years ago, but what grabbed me here was ignorance, how ignorant I am, and I suspect others are, but being on that same page, I hope you folks are getting great publicity and promotional for what you're doing. Your film, Dan, terrific. I can't wait to see the rest of the other 14 minutes. I recently saw one by the Susskind family. I'm sure you're well aware of that film with the autistic child, the Susskind family. Oh, yeah.
Animated.
I was ignorant. And
Life Animated is what you're, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Life Animated.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great film
I
also.
was ignorant about that, and I'm not a sleeping person. I just think your whole thing, every one of you, and Michael with his wonderful attitude and how people are saying that they're so ignorant, that seemed to be the theme that pervaded each one. People are ignorant, and I hope you have publicity, PR, and propulsion to get this out to the public, whether you use social media. I mean, we got them all marching Saturday. You guys need to do that too, because you're experts. You're doing wonderful things, but I don't think a lot of people know about it. And I'd like to help, and I suspect other people here would like to help, and let everybody else know about it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got all this now, so careful. We have all your
Right, it cut out a little bit, but yes, we do have your emails, and we will be signing you up to help. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cynthia Molina. I have a 6th grade boy on the autism spectrum in Oakland Unified School District. Hi, Cheryl. And I am one of those who went from a special day class in 5th grade to a full inclusion program in 6th grade. Oh my God, like 0 to 300 miles per hour. You know. And the biggest challenge, of course, for middle school, for inclusion, no matter the willingness of people, is like working with like 14 different individuals, all the aides, all the different teachers, you know. So, and figuring out like what's the philosophy and the founding principles of the people that are working with your child. And I understand, and yet labels are not all defining, but there are certain very specific things to each of our experiences. And for a child like mine, his interests are so specific that the challenge is the curriculum. So yeah, you could have every accommodation for like the anxiety of somebody looking at you, for a particular seating, for time to walk away, for, you know, for all those scaffolds that we need. But when the curriculum is not at all like engaging or relevant, and we're doing like early history, pre-medieval, whatever, you know, and there's no hook, I don't see the willingness to say this child can follow his own project. He can do something so individual in this context, and we're gonna let him be. So, and I think that we're not tackling the curricular challenge, and I want to hear from people, like, what happens when that STEAM class that's all engineering, and my child loves animals, is not relevant, or that medieval history has no context for him. So what do you do with that part, you know? So that's my biggest challenge right now.
Well, first of all, you always know you can call us in the Parent Training Center at Redif. You know, it's frustrating to me when I hear people say what you're saying, because I know it's true. I dealt with it with my own son, who's on the autism spectrum and is now thriving at UC Santa Cruz, where for the first time all he thinks about is computers, and people think he's really smart and give him money to do it. But, you know, all he wanted to do was, every paper he wrote was about computers, everything he wanted to do related to computers, all his friends were on the computer. And so it's frustrating, and I bet you have something to say about this as well, because it's not that hard, right? It's just not that hard. If you're teaching about, you know, biology, and your favorite animal is a magical unicorn, it's really not that hard to adapt that lesson plan a little bit to include that. And that's what I meant about unpacking our own biases. Like, what is smart? Is smart that you can follow the textbook, or is smart being able to say, this textbook doesn't work for me, I'm gonna do my own thing? What I find is that a lot of parents, and I related so much to what you said, is, you know, we're adapting the homework ourselves. We become, you know, our child's educational coaches. I, at some point, just got tired enough to just simply say, and I have to recognize that part of the reason I can do this is because of where I work and the job that I have. We won't be doing that. That's a dumb assignment. But we'll do this other thing instead. And it, you know, it works. It works when you just call people out and say, you know, this isn't relevant. You know, my child who has trouble writing, and she's 10 years old, and, you know, she's a hell of a survivor, and she's been through everything you can imagine, neurosurgery, trauma, you know, the loss of her biological mother, everything you can imagine. She's the smartest person I think I know. And she's 10 years old, but she cannot cut out the spelling words fast enough and glue them in alphabetical order without it taking 2 hours. We're not doing that. So it's frustrating to hear that, and I know it's real. And I just want to say that's why parent advocacy is so important, and that's why knowing where to reach out for help so that you know what your rights are and your right to insist on an accommodation like that, that's your right, and that's your child's right. So we have to keep fighting.
There's another question back here.
Hi, my name is Julie Casenza, and I self-identify as a dyslexic scholar, and I'm currently writing my dissertation on dyslexia in higher education and what we can learn, not seeing it as a deficiency, but what we can learn from dyslexia about the educational system. And my findings, I'm writing my conclusion today, my findings are...
Yay, light at the end of the tunnel.
I know,
We're cheering you on.
Almost there.
Yay! It's been a long time. I work at my own pace. So my findings are, I advocate for individualized learning models in higher education. It's something that the National Disability Association is advocating for. And I'm wondering how, just kind of thinking about what we were just talking about how the curriculum isn't really engaging for some students, or it's not relevant for some students. I know you have a lot of experience in higher education. Are you trying to work that model in about students creating their own assignments? How can we set different timelines? Like, I don't know who came up with midterms, but maybe we don't want to like produce knowledge halfway through the semester. I don't know. So I'm just wondering where what your thinking is about individualized learning models.
I think it's a great question, and one of the reasons why I think it's such a great question is because our universities are not set up this way, right? People can envision how you can include your kindergartner. People have a harder time envisioning how you can include your 11th grader or your college student, right? They think, sure, kindergarten, we're learning colors and shapes, and we can include anybody in that. And then the curriculum becomes more complex, and we see that we leave more and more students behind in terms of inclusion. It's hard for people to envision, which is why it's so impressive that you went from the woman in the back there who said that they went to full inclusion in junior high, because a lot of our students who don't start out in full inclusion don't end up with that opportunity later. And I would say in answer to that, we're not doing a great job of working with universities to teach them how all students can be included. I think that we're trying really hard. There is something called the TIPSID. We're one of the 20 TIPSIDs in the United States. It's transition and post-secondary programs for students with intellectual disabilities, really looking at trying to get institutes of higher education to be more inclusive for students with intellectual disabilities in particular, who end up being sort of the most excluded from higher ed, but also ways that we can help other students who are marginalized in higher education by really helping professors think outside the box in the ways that we design higher ed. It's a slow-moving beast. I think that we have a long way to go.
I just wanted to add, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the woman in the back and just the concern about college, I think a lot of this is about valuing the learning of everybody, and that not everybody has the same goals. So whether I'm including a student in a 6th grade ancient civilizations course, or a 10th grade biology course, or an elementary school, it's about let's challenge that student to learn more within that content and within whatever content standards are being taught, and so it's a matter of though valuing that, and that's kind of a fundamental attitudinal philosophical idea that we have a hard time, that some people have a hard time with, I think, in our society, just like so many other forms of discrimination. And so thinking about it, and there's such a range of ability levels in every classroom, at every age level. So, but there is always a way to learn more within whatever context you're being educated in.
We're excited to read your research. Thank you for doing the work you're doing.
Just one quick thing. get at the question you asked, which I think, we talk about universal design for learning, and it's often about how the information is being presented to the students, but it's just as much about how the students are showing their knowledge. So an example is that Samuel, I call Samuel one of the most voracious readers I've ever met in my life, and he can't read because his eyes don't track, so he listens to a lot of audiobooks. He also has started turning in his homework assignments, especially his bigger ones, as short films. So yeah, he's got a little influence from a father filmmaker, but like for instance, he had this big final project last year for 10th grade. His history class wanted to assigned a project on a civil rights movement, and his English class assigned a project on the American dream. And he proposed pitching them, kind of putting them together into a film. And I think that most teachers really do want solutions. They really want to have the children be successful. I 100% believe that. And I think if the parents, as you said, can suggest ways that the student can be successful and participate, teachers will, for the vast majority, accept that. So Samuel, many of you probably know Judy Heumann, big-time disability rights advocate from the Bay Area. She is someone I know a little bit, and other people on the panel know her. So Samuel arranged a Skype with her. He Skyped with her. We recorded the Skype, and then that was about an hour-long Skype. And then I filmed him doing the Skype, and then which you could do with an iPhone on a little tripod if you're low tech. And then he did all this research on Judy. He had in advance done research and came up with all these questions that he asked her with his communication device, which is how he does most of his communication. And then he found pictures online and video, and he spent about 30 hours making every single decision about how to put this film together, and he put together this 18-minute film on Judy. If you go to YouTube and just Google Samuel Habib, Judy Heumann, you can watch it. And the teachers loved it. I'm sure it was a lot more fun than reading sloppily written papers by some of their other students. And then something really cool that just kind of capped it off and was very affirming happened a few weeks ago. I had posted on Facebook, and this Russian film festival, Breaking Down Barriers, asked for the film to be submitted to their film festival. This was actually a few months ago. And I didn't know if anything had ever happened with it. And then like a week ago, I get this box in the mail from Russia. And I'm like, should I open it? Is it a recording device? I mean, what is it? But I opened it, and it was a plaque for Samuel and the program from the film festival that he had been featured in. So he'd been featured in this international film festival. And it was so awesome. Went home and I gave it to Samuel, and I said, Samuel, this is how careers are built. Like, you have done something really amazing towards building a career for his goal, which is to be a multimedia storyteller. So just a quick anecdote. I mean, the teachers loved it. He loved it. The Russians loved it. It was just, So anyway, just some inspiration, I hope, for you.
Yes?
Hi, I'm Ann Halverson. I'm at Cal State East Bay, and a longtime colleague of lots of folks here. As a university professor, I will not hesitate to say that university professors are some of the worst trained people in strategies for instruction, unless they're in colleges of education where they were teachers, and good teachers. There is no training in most doctoral programs for how to teach adults. It just isn't there. It's content training for most people. A lot of us went to doctoral programs, Kathy and I went to the same one, where we were taught how to teach. We taught each other if our mentors didn't know how. But let me add to that Universal Design for Learning has been in the Higher Education Act longer than it's been in IDEA or K-12. So universities, thanks to the National Instructional Media's Accessibility Act that preceded Universal Design, has been in law, and we're supposed to be in our universities learning and teaching how to employ it. And so it is something we can advocate for as law in our universities. That doesn't help the people who aren't already there, but it will assist the students who are there to know that and have that available to them.
Or unfortunately, there's so many people who are out there who have never even heard of universal design. Right.
Hello. So I'm V. Navarro, and I actually went to Cal State East Bay and had Dr. Howardson, and I graduated in 2016. I have cerebral palsy, but I have my BA. My question was, at my community college, there's a teacher that's an English teacher that would be willing to have me in class, like as a volunteer. So I was wondering what type of like stuff that might. How do you guys teach? What's my responsibility? How did you make a position? Stuff like that.
So I think if it's okay with you, I'd like to rephrase the question and just ask Micah, how did you, Micah, become a teaching assistant, and what kind of advocacy did you have to do for yourself to be able to get that kind of position?
I think I had to talk to the chair of talk to the chair of the department. When I first moved to Syracuse, I was teaching the same class that I am teaching now, the SB 311. I was teaching one class, and then as I did more work at Syracuse, I was able to teach the same class for a second year, and then I met with the chair, and then he said you could teach a whole two semesters still, and then this past semester now I'm teaching a second class, and I help grade journals. I help pass out things in class, and I talk to meet with the students. And
so I think, really your question goes to this idea around advocacy, right? And teaching students how to be good advocates for themselves that you were talking about, Cheryl. Does anybody else have advice for V?
So I was just going to say that you're in the right place, because there's several people who work at universities in this room, and there's someone from University of San Francisco who works in the Disability Studies program, and one thing you might want to do is write up a little bio about yourself and what you have to offer, and then pitch that to university professors in the area around where you live. And because sometimes people have grants that they can provide speaker fees for, they might be able to bring you in as a volunteer, but just to get some of that experience. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And go ahead.
I was going to say, Veronica, that a lot of teachers, a lot of people who work in colleges know that there's not just one kind of teaching these days, right? There's a lot of adjunct teachers, there's assistant teachers, paraprofessionals who are also can be teachers. And I think, so part of it is the advocacy that we were talking about, and part of it is the commitment from us as a society of this idea of nothing about us without us, and making sure that if you're teaching a course around disability, you should have people with disabilities helping to teach that course. It just should be a matter of necessity.
Okay, another question in the back.
Hi, my name is Kelly Huff, and this is for Dr. Gee. I have two children, 5 and just turned 9. They both have Down syndrome. And when my son went into kindergarten, a whole lot of heck opened up on us. Because he has Down syndrome, they automatically wanted to segregate him. They did not want to provide appropriate services. You all know the story. Now, we're talking about how teachers aren't trained for inclusion. And this is a problem, and this is where you come in. Where do the teachers come from? They come from you all. And this is where the paradigm shift needs to, I don't know if it needs to begin, but you all play a role. I know the idea of colleges supply and demand, but why would you want to supply something that is so egregious that is in demand? It is a civil rights issue. It is a social rights issue. My children are being abused. My family is being abused. I had to march on the streets of Mill Valley with signs, get 70,000 people to sign a petition, spend $200,000 in a lawsuit So my kid is included in school. What responsibility do universities have to take a stand? If teachers were not taught, if you didn't supply teachers who would teach in a segregated setting and further marginalize my child and discriminate, it would be really hard for this to continue. So I want to know from your point of view, globally, not just from your university, what role do universities or responsibility do universities take in the perpetuation of the abuses that are occurring to my children and others like them? Thank you.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I know that many of us in this room train teachers to be inclusive educators, but we don't get enough out there, and there's still a lot of teachers out there who are very biased related to people with intellectual disabilities, and for all the reasons that are in Dan's film. And so I think that it's a travesty that that's how your family's been treated, and we are trying to get more and more teachers out there with the right training. But when you're in a situation like that, I think also calling people at Disability Rights and Education Fund, getting advocates to work with you, because you're right, it's very wrong that your children are being treated that way, and many of us testify for various cases that DREDF brings against school districts. It's always better, as Dan mentioned, if we can collaborate and start off in a very positive way and get university folks in to help the school. There's nothing better than I like to do to help a school make things different for kids. But sometimes you end up having to go to an advocate in order to make that happen. And so I'm hoping that maybe some of the connections you might make tonight might also assist your family in making better things happen at your school.
So in California, change is even slower than it was when I was in New York. But
Can you get the mic? Because I can't hear you too well. I'm not sure. Others might not either.
Hold on, here comes Carly.
change is unbelievably slow, and in universities, I find that sometimes it's slower than anywhere. In California, until very recently, all that we had in the system, in the credentialing system of the state, which is led by Linda Darling Hammond, who's a scholar out of Stanford, so write to her. All that we had was this one course, which she also thought was a travesty, one course that general ed teachers would take for their graduate credentials, because in California you don't get an undergraduate credential, you cannot major in education. It is an academic major, and you do it post-grad. So these are graduate students, and they were getting one course in a year, a full-time year of student teaching and coursework. And the change that is coming slow as molasses is that a couple of years ago, a special ed task force at the state level examined the preparation of general ed teachers as well as special ed teachers, based on the data that the teacher graduates were supplying themselves. There is an exit survey that every teacher at a CSU gets every year. Those are the public universities. I don't know if the private universities are doing the same thing. But the state tracks the ones in the public universities, and one of the questions on this survey is how well prepared do you feel to teach English learners? And then another question, how well prepared do you feel to teach students with disabilities? They used to put the two together, and so they got, for whatever reason, who knows, they got a sort of muddled answer because California's preparation of teachers to teach English learners is much better, and it's mandated to be. And so they separated them, and only something like 50% of teachers in most of our universities said they felt at all prepared. So in our university, a concerted effort went on. We have a dual credential program, general special ed, for one group of people, but that's not everybody. Our teacher ed department is hiring special ed faculty as full-time tenure track people next year. And every year now we're doing a campus, college-wide, so all the graduate programs, the principals, general educators, special educators, counselors, school psychologists, in a day-long seminar that's led by an expert in universal design who's been a teacher for many years, and one of the local school teams who is a SWIFT national
knowledge site, to talk about the nuts and bolts of how this happens. We're doing more guest lecturing within our ed leadership, and we've always co-taught and done some work with general ed in the past. There's much more to be done. But through the state special ed task force, new teacher performance expectations that every graduate of a credential program must demonstrate skill in have been passed. And those include universal design, multi-tiered systems of support, positive behavior intervention and support, and other areas of collaboration that are now required that teachers demonstrate. That said, we're talking about people who are just coming out. And so we know how long it takes for this to happen. Linda Darling-Hammond has a real priority on professional development as well. But again, that's a state level action. State in California controls credential programs, which means they control what universities are allowed to teach, basically. Just like our state board picks our textbooks. We don't get to pick them. And so we have a lot of state issues that control things in this state, but the state issues for teacher credentialing are heading in the right direction. Unfortunately, as you say, there's so many people out there already that it will be a very long time without professional learning that we see that kind of change.
And I'd like to say that there's also some universities that are doing a really good job of training future educators to be inclusive educators, no matter who they are. When I was an undergrad, you had to choose between being an elementary ed major and being a special ed major. And I chose to double major so that I could get both of those. But at Syracuse, we actually don't have that as an option. You cannot be an elementary education major. You can only be an inclusive elementary education major or an inclusive early education major. There's no option to not learn about disability and have that throughout all of your coursework. Okay, question
Hi.
over here.
My name's Audrey. I'm both a parent and a special education advocate. And my question is to two topics we've talked about tonight. One is the IQ scores and one is the law, because those are the two things that I have to deal with my clients all the time who are faced with the situation that Mom just described, which is very painful, where the school district wants to see IQ scores, and in some ways, I work with primarily with families whose kids have had brain surgery for epilepsy, so they have neurological issues. They need to be evaluated so we can determine where their strengths and weaknesses are, and part of that is an IQ score. So then the district will look at that and say, well, they've got a low IQ because none of those measures are normed for kids with visual, motor, or hearing disabilities, which our kids all have after the type of hemispherectomies and the type of surgeries that I work with. So they're looking at that score and saying, well, they need to go into a life skills class. So as an advocate and looking at the culture and the law and how it might change in the next few years, what can we do right now to get schools to put less emphasis on that IQ score as a determinant of placement and more emphasis on other abilities or these universal design and inclusive practices? It is a legal issue right now because that's the only place we really have to argue it. The only leg most parents have to stand on is to fight the school district in court. But I want to look at what you can do, what we can do in the meanwhile, if we don't have that at our, to help us, depending on what happens with the law, with these families that have these IQ scores that are low and they're getting placed into a placement that's not going to meet their needs. They're being forced into the wrong placement.
So, first of all, thanks for being an advocate for our kids. Dredda had a family last year who had a little one who had communications barriers and was, labeled intellectually disabled and was struggling her mother really wanted, the family also didn't speak English. There were a lot of complicating, intersectionalities, the name of the game here. So they were struggling because they weren't heard in the meetings, they weren't included, there weren't translators, all those things that we see all the time. And on top of that, the mother would tell them, when we finally got a translator there, that the child could do all these things, and they just kind of went, smiled like, sure, you're her mom, you think she can do all these things. And one of the most powerful things her mom did, and at one of the other advocates in our office's suggestions, was she started videotaping her in her home environment, and showing her at the park, and showing her friendships and all the things that she was capable of. And when that video was shown, I think that including her reading, which they really didn't think she could read at all and were absolutely convinced that what they were seeing was a child with really low capacity, but in fact her anxiety was so huge that she just couldn't possibly show what she knows. And I think for many of us, even as adults, we know that test anxiety is really real, and so this comes into play as well. But at any rate, the teachers were shocked, and you could see the shock, and it was a moment of, oh, okay, and she ended up being put into a program that was much more inclusive and much more appropriate to her needs. But it took the advocacy. I think the trouble is that for most parents, especially with a first child with a disability where you're struggling through all these issues, you're on a steep learning curve. And that's why the parent centers are important, but it's also why, I think one of the things we tell people all the time is make your child real and whole in those meetings. Bring videos, bring stories, ask them even if, we can never get our surly teenagers to go, it's so important for them to be there, but they struggle. Videotape them the day before, get them to make notes, read their poem, bring them into the meetings, because I think, part of what's important about this film and that I really appreciated is that it puts people who have these labels, I like to say, use the labels when they help you. When they don't help you, don't use them. It's not that simple when it comes to special ed because of questions of qualifying and so on. But bring your child into the meeting, either physically or in other ways, so that the conversation stops being about everything they can't do. I can't tell you how many meetings I'm at where the first discussion is around evaluation results and challenges and deficiencies and where the child needs help, instead of starting with that child's strengths. She's a wonderful friend, she's a dancer, he's an artist, those kinds of things. And it really changes the tone of the meeting when you say things like, can we just wait a minute? Can you just, everybody go around the room and talk about something this child is wonderful at, please? Really changes the way things go.
That's great.
Micah's family tells this wonderful story about his IEP meetings when he was younger, that, Micah, you always went to your IEP meetings, right?
Yeah.
But also they brought friends, Micah's friends, to his IEP meetings. Hi, we have a guest that wants to come on the stage. We'll give you the mic. Micah's family advocated for him to bring a friend to IEP meetings, and they tell this wonderful story about and I might get it a little bit wrong here, but just to paraphrase, that there was a time when the team was around the table and they said, Micah's having a really hard time paying attention in class. And the friend spoke up and said, well, that's because the teacher is super boring. And what they realized as a group was that everyone wasn't paying attention in that class. Micah just didn't know how to fake it in the way that everybody else did. So, that became a learning experience for him, but it became a learning experience for everybody, in that when you have other people at the table who aren't usually there, there's a lot of insight that can happen.
And I think that speaks to person-centered planning, which we've spoken a lot about tonight, where foundational to new students coming to my classroom, I'd ask the parents, hey, can we have a person-centered plan at your house or wherever is appropriate, where you're disrupting that school power dynamic of having meetings at the IEP table, and we had a barbecue at one of my students' house who just moved to the district. We had a pool party and drank beers and had steak afterwards, and we invited neighbors and cousins and in-laws and everybody, and we said, what do you value about this person, and what can we do? And it grounds everything in such an immediacy of what can we do now, but let's really challenge each other to think 18 years down the road. Are we talking college, employment, where are they living, what kind of relationships are they going to have, college roommates, those types of things. And it helps ground your IEPs around this person in a really positive way, and you start your trajectory of your IEP goals towards these really huge goals later, and it's pivotal.
Dan, you had something
to
add.
Yeah, great comments from the three of you. And I wanted to add a couple things. One is that there's a scene that'll probably be in the film. Micah doesn't know this yet, but it's a great scene. I was just editing it this week, so it's fresh in my mind. But I met Micah and his family a couple times, and once Micah was talking with his parents and his sister at the lunch table in Western Mass, and they were talking about how they used to meet monthly with your team, you and the team and friends. And Emma, who's also a teacher, Micah's sister, is like, you met monthly? Like, I have 5 kids on IEPs. How am I going? Like, why did you meet monthly? Isn't there any other way to do it? And Rich, your dad, says, well, I guess you could meet every other week. And she's like, no, that's not what I mean. But I think that the point that I take from that, a lot of great things coming out of that scene, but one of that is that a lot of this was about relationship building, and it kind of gets back to what you said, building that relationship with the whole family. And we actually wrote into Samuel's IEP, starting in like 3rd or 4th grade, that we would have consult meetings every month with the team. And we've been doing that since he was in 3rd grade. He's a junior in high school now. That has probably been the single most important element to successful inclusion for Samuel, was regularly meeting with his team. And so you didn't have this one really high pressure IEP meeting every year. And then just directly to the question, which was a great question that you asked. First of all, it's sad but true to think that so many districts and states around the country are using that IQ score as a placement tool. Like, that in itself is horrible, I think, but it's true. So a couple of things that I've experienced. One is that Samuel really struggles in math. And he excels in so many areas, but he's just really struggles in math, as do a lot of people with cerebral palsy, because part of brain development that happens when you climb under things and over things is the same connections that help you with your math skills. That's a proven scientific fact. So I thought he probably had like dyscalculia. Someone brought up dyslexia earlier, which is like math dyslexia. So his neurologist, who's amazing, because I just wanted him to not have to be tortured by algebra, basically, which is a requirement to graduate in our high school, and he's on a diploma track. So our neurologist is awesome. He's like, I'll just write that in his chart, that he has dyscalculia. I don't care. I'll just write it. We're like, no, we should probably get him assessed. So we did get him assessed through what would be considered a typical IQ test, but I told this was just like a few months ago, I told the psychologist, who was great, you will not attach a score to anything in this test. I do not want a number attached to anything. I want information. I want to know about his learning skills, his learning challenges, but I do not want a number, because, I'm in the middle of doing this film and it's such a stigma, that number. So I think you can get some of the same information that might be helpful in a child's educational planning, but just keep the number out of it. And I've interviewed nationally known expert psychologists who said, the number really isn't that important. It's the information. But we're not there as a society yet. Most states take this shortcut and they use that number, and it stays with the kid, and unlike Micah, it becomes a stigma for the family and for the child, and it really does affect the expectations going forward for that child.
I think we have time for just one more question. I know.
And I'm hoping panelists can stick around for a few minutes afterwards if anybody wants to speak with them directly.
I know. It's such a fantastic topic and such a great panel. We could talk all night, but we do have to end it at some point. So we have one question, and it's coming from over here.
Hi, my name is Christina, and I'm a person with a disability, a parent with a disability, and I also have kids with disabilities. I've had the wonderful honor of knowing Micah since he was a teenager. And I think one of the things that hasn't been talked about much, but is very much made a difference in his life and in the lives of many youth with disabilities that I've had an opportunity to work with, is having a strong foundation of disability identity and knowing disability culture and disability rights exists. And I would love to see something like that put into the teaching credential program and just really embedded into different family and parent resource centers as well. As a parent that has a disability, I know that's different coming from me, but I didn't have an IEP, and I've had a disability since I was born, and my kids do have IEPs. But I started my daughter's IEP with a handout on respectful disability language and just setting the stage from a very positive point of view, and being told from the school that it was the first time ever that they could talk about disability was amazing, because they were always told by mostly non-disabled parents that they weren't allowed to label their child as disabled. And I think that's a real disservice to the individual. And I happen to be the program director of Youth Organizing Disabled and Proud, and I cannot tell you how harmful it is every time I get a new youth in our program who tells me, I didn't know that I had a disability. My mom and dad never told me. I was in resource class, or I had an IEP, but I never knew why, and I don't know why I'm here today, but somebody told me they thought it would be a good idea, and they have such a cultural turnaround. But if we can start from as early intervention in talking about what is disability culture and what is positive disability identity. I think that's very, very valuable, and it will also help teachers that I hear on a regular basis use really discriminatory words to describe our community and really disrespectful things in the way that they describe us individually. And I'm sure Micah would have lots of examples and stories to share on how his parents and his family really got him integrated in disability community and culture from a young age. And that's how we actually met. And when we went to the first National Disability Pride Parade in Chicago, it was something that I don't think many youth with disabilities or children would expect or know about, but he has amazing parents and a support system that's phenomenal. His parents have been wonderful role models for me, but Micah, if you wouldn't mind sharing how disability identity, positive disability identity, has shaped your life, that might be helpful for others to hear.
All right.
So Micah, did you always... Thank you. Micah, is talking about disability something you just grew up with, or did you feel like there was a point in your life where your parents talked to you about having a disability?
I think I went to a conference like the Michigan. It was like a 5-day conference up in college, and I learned about like my rights, and I learned and it was like the first time I was like with other people with like disabilities, and then from that I served down some other groups around like the country, and I like learned about having like a disability, and like I met like other people who like had a who like have had a disability.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight. I forgot to mention that one of our panelists had some travel difficulty. Andy Arias was supposed to be here, and he couldn't join us. We are sorry, and he was very much missed as part of the panel. Also, I think Micah's mom has written a book that was for sale at the back table. There are still copies of that available if anyone is interested. And the rest of us will stick around for a few minutes, and if anybody wants to talk or other questions. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our hosts. Thank you to Carly. Thank you to everyone. Thanks for being here.